Welcome. My name's Gregory Farrar. I'm one of the exhibit assistants here at the Oakwood Cemetery Chapel. And today we're going to be going through our digital collection titled To Elevate. And To Elevate looks at the legacy and the history of Huston-Tillotson University. Huston-Tillotson University is the oldest institution of higher learning in Austin, Texas, with roots dating back to 1875. HTU is also Austin's only HBCU, which is a historically Black college or university. And so we're going to get right into this. So with our introduction, to elevate means to raise up or to lift up to a higher position. And it actually has the Latin root elevat or elevatus, which means raised or lifted up. And as we begin this introduction, this project is actually its second iteration. The original iteration debuted at the inaugural 2020 African American Genealogy Conference in February of 2020. And since then, this is essentially its expansion in the second iteration, which has greatly expanded upon that first project that we started. And so as we first kind of introduce this subject, we look at how the roots of this institution came into being. We look at the early roots of Tillotson College in 1875 and the early roots of Samuel Houston College in 1876. And on a personal note, when we decided on the name To Elevate, the reasoning behind it was because of the Latin origin. And one of the individuals that we highlight in this exhibit was one of the early Black classicists. And the early Black classicists were Black Americans who mastered the study of Greek and Latin, basically the classics. And so as we start off with our collection, we have our introduction, and we go directly into HBCU's Roots That Run Deep. And the reason why we're starting here is we wanted to introduce what an HBCU is to either people who don't know a whole lot about HBCUs or are completely unfamiliar with the topic. And so this was a way to introduce how schools such as HTU came into being. And for a lot of people, they might be unaware that for a lot of United States history, Black Americans had very limited options in terms of education. Throughout most of the time, many Black Americans only had the option to be educated in the northern United States. And this was the case. The first HBCU was Cheyney University of Pennsylvania in 1837. And these schools in the North were the only options for many Black Americans to receive a higher education. And that would actually be the case until following the American Civil War, when finally HBCUs began popping up in the American South. And HBCUs basically proved an invaluable resource and a pathway to elevate formerly enslaved African Americans and their families to be educated and to find a way other than the agricultural lifestyle that was normally accepted. And so as we go through the history of HBCUs, we also look at the history of HBCUs here in Texas. And many people might be surprised to find out that there is actually another HBCU that was older than the roots of HTU. And that school was Paul Quinn College. And Paul Quinn College actually opened here in Austin on April 4th, 1872. And people might be surprised of that because it's very soon after its inception moved to Waco, Texas. And it was in Waco, Texas for quite a while until it was finally relocated in 1990 to where it currently resides outside of Dallas, Texas. And so we go through this story map of the early kind of connections of HBCUs here in Texas, and we highlight some of the other local HBCUs. And one of them was Prairie View A&M University. And Prairie View is particularly important because it was actually the first state-sponsored public college for Black Americans in Texas. And what's really interesting is one of the Oakwood Cemetery residents, William H. Holland, was actually the Black legislator who sponsored the bill. And that bill would in turn create this industrial college for African Americans. And so one of Oakwood's very own was very instrumental in bringing Prairie View into existence. And another Oakwood resident, and her name was Helen Mar Kirby. She actually sold the land where Prairie View would eventually be placed. And so we have these really interesting Oakwood connections directly that are directly correlated with HBCUs, not only just Houston-Tillotson, but also several others. And currently, there's still roughly over 100 active HBCUs in the country. And many people might know some of them, such as Howard University, Morehouse, and many others. And so they still provide an amazing experience. And they're not actually just limited to Black Americans. They're open for anyone. But they offer a unique experience and a great environment for African Americans pursuing a higher education. And so that basically wraps up our HBCU story map.